to Jeremy Reese. And sir, thank you so much for presenting this for us again.
Thanks for giving me the shot here. Let me share this with you again. Okay, so that was let me fix this, and I'm going to. All right, yep, I'm on there. All right, cool. Just give me a second to find. I gotta find Zoom now. All right, there's Zoom. Share screen. Sorry, I'm running the live stream as well as this.
Yeah, well, and Jeremy, I probably should mention for everybody also. So this may run over. I set technically when I was setting things out, I was like, okay, we'll say an hour, but I think last time you did this, it took 2 hours, right? So this would be like a classic big scale APEC presentation. So go for it, sir.
All right, and if Mark, if you're there, I'm sharing your screen for this because of the audio through StreamYard. So if you can get that gallery out of the way of my slides. That would be awesome. So I can, because that might block some of the things on the live stream. So, all right. So I just start with this slide because there's lots of bad predictions that have been made in science. This is a technical briefing on UAP, which I prepared for scientists, engineers, and innovators, and the APEC Alternative Propulsion Engineering Conference. It starts, this is kind of like they opened up this whole thing with the government doing a reinvestigation into UAP and stuff, and their investigation goes back to 1945. So that's where I started my whole presentation with one of the biggest intelligence gains that took place in the history of the United States after World War II, where we literally, our troops went through and captured all these scientists. The Russians had their own operation to capture a number of scientists to try to, basically scrap the intellectual property of the leftover Nazi Germany at the end of World War II. So, yeah, this is a picture of President Kennedy with some of the Operation Paperclip scientists who would go on to create NASA and a number of other important milestones. But there are a number of other interesting Nazis that did get away, and others that either died in the war or were captured by Russian intelligence. And this whole controversy over the Glock we've heard of, this Nazi Bell experiment allegedly, and also but what we have here is that a few key paperclip scientists may have been involved with the Roswell incident 2 years later as well. I know that the Aeromed lab at Wright-Patterson got a lot of intelligence from Dachau concentration camp prisoners who were used in human experimentation in these altitude chambers, and Hubertus Strughold was later revealed to be have been involved with that. It was covered up for years, and he was kept as a scientist and intelligence asset and protected by the intelligence agencies, which is interesting. I wonder if there's any more cases like that. I haven't really looked deeper, but Ernest Steinharff, colleague of von Braun, he said that a select group of paperclip scientists were taken by federal authorities to the New Mexico desert for a purpose left unstated in July 1947. They were escorted to an area with strange wreckage from an aerial object and then asked to study the crash site. The Americans wanted assurance that it wasn't of Soviet or other foreign country origin, and Steinhoff said it was not. They were instructed to not remove any material from the crash site, and he said that he heard some of the material was taken to underground facilities at Wright Airfield. He requested of Blisius, the interviewer, that he never say anything about this until he passed away. Ernst died in 1987, and this was published. Again, maybe it's nothing, it's circumstantial, but it's certainly interesting evidence in the chain of whether the government should be looking and its reinvestigation of these things. There are a number of other scientists as well that we'll talk about. Of course, there's the Horton brothers who were working on, the Twining memo. There's a bad version of the Twining memo, which makes it look like it was, related to, much more. There's two versions. There's a fake version and the real one. So, But anyways, they had just recovered this object and they were looking into it. And one of the questions that Twining, one of the top intelligence, head of Pentagon intelligence during Roswell, thought is that it could have been a Horton brothers craft. And the Horton brothers actually were working on this is a picture of the Horton parabola, and very similar in description to Kenneth Arnold's sighting in 1947, which he said they were skipping across the air like flying saucers, and they took that phrase "flying saucers" and that went out as these were flying saucers, and it started the whole flying saucers wave. But what Kenneth Arnold actually cited looked closer to this Horton parabola craft, surprisingly and interestingly, that the head of the Pentagon intelligence would also ask about the Horton brothers and their whereabouts. In relation to that, of course, after 1947, we have the National Security Act, the creation of the CIA, creation of the U.S. Air Force, and a number of other interesting things. So we had an aircraft as well that were these wing shaped. These were the predecessors of the modern B-2 Spirit plane, and we also had a number of craft that in the history that they're documented that looked like flying saucers or flying wings or other type of craft. Of course, the United States Air Force maintains that it was Project Mogul weather balloon train. Even though high-ranking members of the Army R&D Foreign Technologies desk, like Philip Corso, wrote books saying that, no, this was alien technology and that we developed a whole series of these technologies from that. That's kind of old news, 1997. So I did my research into this, found a lot of background theory on the transistor and how it was developed at Bell Labs, and the whole the ideas that these guys were experimenting with P and N doped silicon, and how they actually put together this transistor. So a lot of this mathematics and crystallography and metallurgy and stuff like in mineralogy were known, and it could have led. I see a background progression where these things didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were working on this for 30 years. 10 or 15 years prior to the invention of the transistor, which I do not believe came from alien technology, but doesn't mean that we'll get into some what I think might be alien, can constitute alien technology. I'll try to get through all this stuff. The history of fiber optics. I mean, the Romans knew that light would travel through a flowing outlet of water. And so it's no mystery with that. Roy Plunkett, of course, invented Teflon, and there's a whole boring history of tetrafluoroethylene polymers that you can research on that. It's all interesting that, we create things a lot of times that have amazing uses and they're hailed as wonder inventions, only later to discover that, they've wreaked horrible catastrophes on humanity. So PFAS is a type of Teflon that was used in pans. So if you have any old pans, you might want to throw them away and make sure that you're not using old Teflon pans, because they could have PFAS in them. You could be poisoning your body and organs with this toxic chemical. So a lot of people don't even know about it. It's also in fire retardant foams. They actually put out a house fire in my parents' town, and it poisoned half the well water in the town with PFAS. Nitinol wire. These shape retention alloys are super interesting, and there might be reason to believe that aliens might build their craft out of these things. Of course, the interesting thing about Roswell is the number of witnesses that talked about this memory foil, and I've brought this up a number of times. They said it was a fabric-like metal, or a metal-like fabric that was indestructible. That was Captain Robert McLaughlin of the U.S. Navy, who apparently took a piece of this to White Sands proving ground, that the facility there, and tried to have one of their top machinists drill a hole through it, to which they burned out several titanium bits and were not able to puncture a hole through the material. So interesting story, but is there any kind of basis for this in reality? I mean, can we make nitinol mesh wire fabric and do this? Does it act like this? So what was that? material then, if it wasn't this material that these people describe that couldn't be burnt or bent or cut with a knife and stuff. Interesting. I talk about zero, the ability of this nitinol wire, and I have this slide to show zero tolerance machining, where they can actually machine parts that fit together like seamlessly with zero tolerance. So if you can imagine these things being made as part of your craft, with a door made out with a nitinol hinge in it, the nitinol could be heated up. It could be bent out of position and then heated up. As soon as you heat it up, it will return back to position. So you could make these sort of seamless openings that some of these UFO witnesses have described in experiencer accounts, where you can have metal doors that appear out of just the metal of the wall and then close back up with no seams. Really interesting stuff. And BOPET or Mylar was not invented until here's the patent issue. It was filed in 1948, May 13th, 1950. So yeah, this wasn't invented until after. Maybe they were working with it. Maybe they didn't file the patent for it and they had it and they were making it and experimenting with it. Maybe it was a secret space program that had this Mylar, but Mylar wasn't invented until the year after Roswell, or the mid 1950s is when the BOPET films were developed by DuPont Imperial Chemical Industries. So it's unlikely that this was Mylar. Of course, it sounds even more like the remarkable properties of this material sound almost like a metallic glass alloy. Talked about met glass and metallic glass, but those weren't developed until the 1960s. So metallic glass alloys, as have incredible performance capabilities. That you make a tuning fork out of this metallic glass, it will literally ring for 10 times longer than a stainless steel or titanium tuning fork. And the elastic limit and strength of glass alloys are off the charts in comparison to titanium alloys, steels, and polymers. So really interesting super materials. Definitely the type of material I would use to build the hull of my spacecraft. But again, I'm not sure if this is what that memory foil was, or if there's anything to that story, but I just find it super fascinating to look at real science and try to merge it with lore or imagination or whatever you call it. So when it turns out you get these metallic glasses, it's this random orientation of this. It's a more dense structure than an ordinary crystal. So an ordinary crystal is like the least dense. It's of the three anyways. And then you have this other packing, which is called the quasi-crystal packing. And that's when you have certain symmetries, which are not localized, but they're global. Like if you zoom in on the crystal, these points are not symmetric. It starts to look the same. And the further you get out in this quasi-crystal, the more crazy it will start looking from this central flower, with the matching rules that are required for the quasi-crystal Penrose tilings. You think of a quasi-crystal as a Penrose tiling in 3D, and the quasi-crystals were theorized by certain people. They're actually first created. We didn't even know we created them, but we first created these in the atomic bomb blasts of the 1940s at the Trinity test site. Because research, if you take trinitite, you'll find quasi-crystals in it that were generated at atomic blasts. And you can actually look at quasi-crystals from atomic blasts and be able to tell detailed information from the formation of those quasi-crystals. You'd be able to scientifically determine, the megaton release and the technical information about the warhead that was used to create them through these quasi-crystals. So lots has come out of this in the years past that we didn't know about. We just rediscovered sometimes decades later. And it took this one, it was discovered, it's interesting. Daniel Shechtman did his NRC fellowship at Aerospace Research Labs at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio in 1974. So the Air Force was apparently looking into this kind of stuff as far back as the mid 1970s. And this quasi-crystals thing they were big on it. Apparently they knew about these things or something, but I don't know why he was the first one to discover it. And while he was there, I'd really like to interview him and learn more about that and the history of how this discovery happened. But the fact is, when this discovery happened, the mainstream scientific community, like Linus Pauling and other, established chemists, prevented the science from evolving for decades. Said there's no such thing as quasi-crystals, only quasi-scientists. So eventually Daniel Shechtman would go on to, I think, the 2011 or 14 Nobel Prize. He actually won the Nobel Prize later, but it took 4 decades because he had to wait for the old crowd to die out, the resistance, so to speak, to die out. So that's unfortunately what some of us are facing. Not all old people are as stubborn and unrelenting as others, but it's a sad fact in the scientific community that revolution, the nature of scientific revolutions such as this. Quasicrystals can also be used to warp incoming signal, so that you can actually reflect an incoming signal at 90 degrees and without losing any signal quality with a quasi-crystal junction. And this was discovered in Princeton, New Jersey, and among other remarkable optical properties, which are just beginning to be discovered. But quasi-crystals are interesting because I learned about these through a guy named Edgar Fouché. Edgar Fouché was a former Area 51 employee, and he talked about quasi-crystals at his disclosure in 1998. I think he actually didn't mention the quasi-crystals until 99. I went back to the 98 one and I couldn't find anything about them in that, but I found it in the 99 one. So maybe he came back in 99 and between 98 and 99 learned about the quasi-crystals, because he was on about these quasi-crystals in that one, saying that quasi-crystals, if you want to know how UFOs reach other dimensions, then reach the far reaches of space-time, he said quasi-crystals is the answer. So you think about quasi-crystals, if you wanted to access higher dimensions in physics, well, a quasi-crystal is like a 3-dimensional projection of a 4-dimensional object, or a 5-dimensional object. So you can possibly access higher dimensions through quasi-crystals due to this intergroup theory dimensionality of the way that they're connected. It's peculiar, but and I don't say I fully understand it, but it's certainly something worth considering and looking into, especially considering I don't know. It also, I would say considering the source, but Ed, I'm still not sure about some of the things that Ed talked about, because, he had this whole TR-3B flying triangle craft that he said was this, Tom DeLonge showed this on Joe Rogan, a fake video of this thing he called the TR-3B, and he wrote about this in Secret Machines. But I've never found any hard evidence for a craft. And he said this thing was massive and that they built, they were building these things for a secret space program and that they ran on anti-gravity. He said that it used a mercury plasma accelerator ring called the magnetic field disruptor, rotated to 60,000 RPMs, which is incredibly fast, at 250,000 atmospheres, which is a massive amount of pressure. And he said the gravity is only reduced by 89%, but I don't know how much of that I believe, because I've never found any evidence for it in the last 10, 15 years. And recently, after I took part in a documentary film about the TR-3B and shared what I knew and my experiences and everything, I found this whole a whole bunch of secret craft that were developed by Teledyne Ryan. And we'd always thought that Teledyne Ryan was responsible for if there was a TR-3B contractor, but, because they did do the TR-3A, but then he found out so much stuff about these flying triangles that they were developing in the 1970s. And you find out it's all part of this stealth program, that these things were ultra quiet and ultra small. And that, that makes me question the TR-3B story. I mean, this came out in 1998, so this is like 2 decades after this. So it doesn't seem like it would be a cover story for, this operation, because this is already old news at that point. We were having, this is when Teledyne Ryan started introducing like the Global Hawks and some of these other UAVs, and sold out to Northrop Grumman, I believe. I think they sold out. The whole company sold out in 1998. And actually, when they did, they gave all their archival footage to the San Diego Air and Space Museum. And they actually posted this footage 10 years ago. And it's been up on the internet with like 78 views. And just no one ever knew about it until Stephen Greenstreet found it somehow, which was awesome, man. Special thanks to Stephen Greenstreet for finding that and putting that out. The B-2 Spirit Bomber was, of course, these craft were a lot of the test craft for the B-2 Spirit Bomber, which came out of this. B-2 Spirit Bomber is an interesting case. It was built at a place called Site 4 at Plant 42, Palmdale. And even though they had a budget and they paid for a production run of 133 B-2 Spirit Bombers, in the end, only 21 were produced. So that leaves like a big gaping question. And, you're a factor of almost, 15% off of your production. You're 15% of I didn't do the math on it. I just kind of did it quick in my head, but you're a very small fraction of what you're paid for and what you're getting. So is there money being funneled into other programs? That's a whole nother question. There's, the F-35 is a great example of, how we pump so much money into these new planes, but we end up, only getting very little out of the billions that we spend. And there's questions, is there a secret space program developing UFOs out there where this money is really going? It should be looked into. It's something that should be taken seriously. There's another Site 4 at Tonopah Test Range, actually which is Area 52. That's actually an enemy radar replication and test facility. So they build mock radar setups of enemy radar and then test electronic countermeasures against countermeasures against those. So haven't found any evidence for the Bob Lazar's Site 4. Of course, Bob said there was 9 alien vehicles at this Papoose Lake facility. A couple months before that, John Lear was on George Knapp saying that there were 11 in this hangar out there. And just so happens that his friend Bob got a job out there and was able to see all that. It's amazing story. Element 115. Still can't completely rule it out. As much as I've debunked a lot of the stuff, I think that element 115, if you look at the science and the physics of it, there is an island of stability here. And when you look at things like hafnium isolation and other laser induced, where you can take gamma rays and basically trap these, if you pump the same energy into these radioactively unstable isotopes, you can actually get them to remain stable. So there might be a way that we could stabilize this using, high-powered gammas pumped into it. But again, this is super dangerous to be working with, and not sure. Ricardo Storti is the expert on this. If you want to look up him, that was APEC from 312. If people are interested in seeing a more scientific, in-depth analysis on the whole Bob Lazar thing. I got way too much other stuff to cover in this to really get into it. Other than the fact that his story of the 2 scientists dying sounds a lot like the Lewis Slaughton accident, the Demon Core criticality test that killed 2 scientists out in Los Alamos. The Demon Core did anyway. John von Neumann, another interesting high level security clearance, Manhattan Project physicist. Allegedly, lots of questions on whether he was brought out to the Roswell crash site. Some of these scientists from Los Alamos who worked on the atomic bomb would have had the right physics qualifications and security clearances to be brought out and introduced to something of that nature. So I certainly question why he would devise von Neumann probes in 1947, just months after Roswell. Wrote a whole paper on self-replicating automata, machines that can build copies of themselves and go out and explore planets. Interesting concept. Another interesting scientist, physicist, who directly testified or reported to in an interview with Wilbur B. Smith in 1950 that he was privy to reverse engineering of this alien technology. And he was a scientist who worked on hyper and ultra high tech frequency engineering, which is it's curious. And I wonder if there's more when you really start digging into these people's career, because I found a number of scientists that I started digging in more. I'm like, oh wow, they were involved in this too and that too. So this whole question of the MJ12 group, very curious. There's a lot of suspicious deaths involved, like James Forrestal, the alleged leader of this MJ12, who was the first Secretary of Defense in 1947 after Roswell, and then others like Frank Olson in 1953. He was an American bacteriologist and biological warfare scientist who worked for MKUltra program and was found in a very suspicious murder, never solved. Roscoe Hillenkoetter, he was the acting director of Central Intelligence during July 1947. And he told the New York Times, behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about UFOs, but through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are just nonsense. And that's how it's been ever since, apparently. Project Grudge, 1947 to 1949, was, they chose a bunch of people to pay them to, it was a joke. Jerry Cummings came in and revealed that the entire project was a joke, reported to Cabell, and Cabell Furious institutes Edward J. Ruppelt as the new project director and starts Project Blue Book. And also Project Sign, December 1947 to 1951, where almost ran simultaneously. It was kind of it's kind of interesting that the Grudge and Sign were run both at the same time, but Sign took the a little bit more seriously until. So there's this whole issue that they have a real UFO study and then a fake public UFO study that they show to the public. And that whole issue was brought up with Project Blue Book when the Pinnacle Memorandum came out of J. Allen Hynek's notes. J. Allen Hynek was the head scientist on Project Blue Book for the U.S. Air Force. And in his notes, Jack Fillet found this Pinnacle Memorandum. There's also a Wilbur Smith memo that links more of Sarbocher to some stuff there. I meant to move that slide up to the Sarbocher part, but it got lost here somewhere. So sorry for that jump around. The Pinnacle Memorandum was in J. Allen Hynek's files, and it was CC'd to B.D. Thomas, Howard C. Cross, A.D. Westerman, L.R. Jackson, W.T. Reed, P.J. Rapol, Papa Radol. That's who I believe it was. That I don't know who Repol was. I've never found this guy. And Elsay and Lund. So this is interesting. Start looking into some of these scientists a little deeper. I'll get back to that after we go into some of the other scientists that have come forward. So that none of these scientists have ever come forward. I'm not sure we've been able to track down who these was, but Howard Cross was actually the director of Battelle Memorial Institute. So when you look into Battelle and Battelle Memorial Institute, you'll find out that they did a research and development contract on titanium alloys for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in October in 1949. It started September to October. So they did a progress report on, what happened between those 2 months. And just those 2 months in 1949, metallurgists Eastwood, Craighead, and Fawn had gone through and created phase diagram charts for a whole series of different, binary titanium alloys and also tertiary alloys of titanium. But the one that they focused on most specifically in this 1949 metallurgy report for Wright-Patterson was nickel titanium alloys, which nitinol is a nickel titanium alloy. So this whole question of nitinol and nickel titanium and their titanium alloys, very interesting that they had actually developed in another report around the same time. I think this is in the same report, and it's a separate thing for their report to Wright-Patterson. And for Wright-Patterson, Elroy John Center and Eckert developed a way to analyze samples of titanium by dissolving them in chlorine carbon tetrachloride and then measuring the off gases. So this is very, very interesting, because Elroy Center later said that he was given materials while working at Battelle that he believed were not made on this earth. He said this stuff was crazy and way too advanced. And even, I'm not sure if he talked about the memory foil in specifics, but if you had a this memory foil and you couldn't burn or break it, you want to figure out what it's made of. Well, why did they develop methods for doing that in 1949 for Wright-Patterson? Very curious. So UFO metals don't just start there. There's a number of evidence we have in the history for UFO metals. There's reported crash sites, a number of lists of reported UFO crash sites where craft and bodies were recovered. And there are people that run archaeological expeditions to go out to these sites and try to dig up materials for analysis and testing. And we have some of those materials for analysis, or some of the scientists we're connected with do. And we're trying to come up with better ways to analyze and try to understand those materials as well. This is the Bob White object. It's very similar to an object that was dropped from a Denmark UFO in the 1940s, which is documented in this CIC document. You can find that on Black Vault, and I'll post a copy of this presentation as well. All the links will be in the notes of all my slides. So if you want to look these documents up for yourselves and find the originals that I took these from, you can. But it was reported in the paperwork, the whole chain of custody of where it went to, and the witnesses and everything else. And it says flying saucer debris, Anyways, interesting people that claim to have seen the Roswell craft or this flying, been on these crash recoveries, talk about these UFOs as being, you can see through from the inside. They're silvery gray from the outside looking in, but when you get inside of them, you can actually see through the walls and see to the outside. And that's amazing. If we could have airplanes that do that, you wouldn't have any blind spots. If we have cars, you wouldn't have a blind spot in your car if you could develop technology that could do that. And we have that technology. We're developing some of it. They have these this Invisishield technology, very similar to how this might work, where you could literally have translucent walls where things could be light could just go through the walls. Interesting, decades ahead of its time, but we're talking about UFO technology. Star Trek technology is now real, where you can make glass metals that are actually clear and stuff. So this is transparent aluminum. Yeah, Battelle could hold key information. There's certainly some, one of these contractors that's a quasi-governmental organization. It's very interesting. They own and they manage all of the national laboratories in the United States for the Department of Energy. Brookhaven National Labs, Idaho National Labs, Lawrence Livermore, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge. I don't see Sandia on here, but they manage all those national labs. That's a lot of control that they have over the science inside the United States. Apparently, the British also have a similar thing with Marconi Industries. I didn't get the chance to put that in here, but Marconi, the Marconi Corporation, has been a number of scientists who were shown things and came up with inventions that they couldn't talk about to their wives, and they were all happy and convinced. And then a month later, they travel to some weird place on a weird day and then end up committing suicide. And there's a number of these scientists that did that, who worked for Marconi, that I'm just starting to learn about and investigate, but there might be some connections there to some stuff, because they talk about some of these people that get exposed to this for the first time, and their wives' reactions to it, because they can't talk, and they spend hours just staring at the wall, and like weird stuff happens to people who get exposed to, or shown. Imagine if the government just, like, your job one day brought you and showed you an alien spacecraft, how you'd react. Anyways, there's this rumor that these, in addition to managing the national labs, they manage all these national labs. They have what are called patent holding companies. And these patent holding companies were designed, for national security purposes. So if, a scientist working at one of these labs invents a new type of torpedo technology, that there's a patent holding company that snatches that up. So it doesn't go directly to the US Patent Office, and you can't look that patent up on Google Patent, so that the Russians or Chinese or whoever in other foreign intelligence services can't get a hold of those patents or that technical information. So this is the concept behind this, but a lot of people have complained that these companies, or this organization of that the national security establishment has set up to withhold patents for national security reasons is a form of patent trolling, and that, like, they've suppressed free energy and alternative energy and anti-gravity and other such inventions using this method, because what they do is they have all the patents on it. And if you make a patent on it, they classify it and they steal it, and they say you can't make money off this or work on it. You won't make any money on this if you work on it. So what's the point? In everything, nothing gets done unless there's money involved. Let's be honest. I'm not a contractor. I'm not going to go and do anything for someone who I don't think has the money to pay for it, or isn't going to actually pay me for it. So nothing's going to get done unless you can make money off it. And this is a core method for suppressing advancing science and information and technology, and also, suppressing that kind of stuff. So I included that in to point it out. I also wanted to point out some of the other related agencies, like the Alien Property Custodian. It was created under the Trading of the Enemy Act in 1917, and this was a real governmental office called the Office of Alien Property, or the Alien Property Custodian. And what they would do is, if you had property, like say you had a bank that was funding the Nazi Luftwaffe, they could go in and take your bank from you because you're funding the enemy, or you're trading with the enemy act, or say that you had an invention and it might get out. They could take that invention and take it as property of this office. And there's a number of modern day laws that are in effect to prevent distribution and prevent sharing of that information. And I'm sure that our last speaker, if he was indeed approached by DOD, then he was briefed on the international traffic and arms regulations. And that is the reason why he will not answer certain questions and go deeply into the science, certain classified things. Same thing with Salvatore Pace. So this is all under the Invention Secrecy Act. No, sorry. The Invention Secrecy Act is something else. This was a body of United States federal law designed to prevent disclosures of new inventions and technologies that federal agencies deemed could pose a possible threat to national security. So yeah, these things are installed and built into our patent and trademark office. One such example, I don't know necessarily that this was all was held classified because a lot of things happened, right? So 1946, we jumped around a lot. I'm going back to 1946 now, a year before Roswell. A scientist named Edward Purcell and Felix Bloch discovered nuclear magnetic resonance, that, atoms had a spin or a resonance to them, that you could talk to them through this and get information from them via these spin resonances. And this started a whole new field of science that was classified for a number of years until, it really came out in NMR machines and stuff, where MRI machines, they took the NMRI out. They used to be an NMRI machine, but people were afraid they wouldn't get in a machine that said nuclear on it. So they just called them magnetic resonance imaging machines. And they talk to your protons through by tuning to the wavelength of your protons. And there's a big magnet that you go through, a big giant coil magnet. Magnet spin aligns all your protons. And then a secondary coil gives you a jolt in the opposite direction to set all your protons back off, and then they reset themselves. Well, this can cause some problems in the human body. Interestingly, that certain functions may rely on these spin quantum processes for, such as ion channel uptakes and other, protein conformation and other complicated chemical processes in the body. Worth mentioning, John Archibald Wheeler, of course, was involved in a lot of top secret research along with Edward Mills Purcell. Edward Mills Purcell ended up being recruited by the CIA to run Project Rainbow, which was their whole invisibility stealth program. And John Archibald Wheeler may have been involved in some of that as well. There was these questions about the Philadelphia experiment. I think that there was disinformation put out about, time travel and the soldiers being, warped into the ship and certain things. I don't believe those events ever actually transpired. At least I couldn't find any evidence in my investigation that those events actually transpired. And they seem to be more like disinformation that was put out to disrupt rumors about electronic warfare testing that they were doing on the USS Eldridge with these transmitter and receiver coils that, they called Tesla coils. Of course, if you just know a Tesla coil, then you won't know the difference between, a transmitter and receiver coils or other types of coils. So I think that they were doing degaussing or deviation of degaussing of the ship. They were trying to make it radar invisible by using different types of receiver and transmitter coils. But again, until documentation comes out on that, this whole thing is going to be a big mystery and something we're going to continue to talk about until someone digs in and really breaks that case. We'll get on to other types of antennas. So when you get into Edward Mills Purcell and his research that went on with Project Rainbow, that actually led to the discovery of, metamaterials. And the Russian woodpecker was kind of like a metamaterial antenna array, for this over the horizon radar. They had set up this giant grid and look at the beautiful geometry of that. Same thing with HARP. And that geometry lends to the electromagnetic response and projection capabilities of these types of antenna arrays. So we've known about this since I think it started in 1958. So they hired Purcell for that. The CIA Project Rainbow actually started in 1958. So there's about a decade of gap. So right around the same time NASA was being discovered. And this developed the wallpaper, this anti-Soviet radar coating that they designed for the U-2 spy plane. It used a grid-like pattern to absorb and deflect incoming radar spectra. So we know that the electromagnetic spectrum is divided up according to these FCC frequency allocation tables and charts. There are a number of frequencies which are, banned or owned by the Department of Defense and military and other such that people, regular citizens are forbidden from using. And it's interesting when interesting place to look and go study too. I just figured it worth mentioning for really quickly that this was developed during Project Rainbow. They mapped the whole EMF spectrum and figured out which frequencies were good for what, which ones were bad, which ones caused, harmful interference or problems with the human body. And, the 60s, they discovered the microwave auditory effect and, a number of things, so that they were able to find those frequencies that were bad for the human body and then block them off on the allocation tables, so that, it's no longer legal for people to be broadcasting on frequencies that could, harm you. And that's one of the big things that I brought up during all that whole controversy over 5G and all the conspiracy theories that were going on around that, and just trying to straighten out the science on that with the energetics and the interaction and resonances of what frequencies and will resonate with the human body and other things. There's a deep science to it. Barium titanate and the Fred Dunham story is, of course, interesting. Barium titanate comes up in the late 1950s on the blackboard in the Bonson Labs study that was done by at Bonson Labs with Biefeld-Brown. And Biefeld-Brown were working there. They had written this barium titanate up on the board and noted that it was this ferromagnetic property, but Project Rainbow developed this barium titanate and other methods into these paint for our stealth program. So our stealth aircraft were painted with a barium titanate paint, which would actually be radar absorbent or reflective. It would help with the radar absorbance or reflection of the actual surface of the material. And there's more advanced. Of course, Fred Dunham, the Fred Dunham story. Fred Dunham was a security guard at Area 51 who got really sick after he was from these burn pits. They were taking all this old barium titanate and barium and strontium and all these other things that they had built out at Area 51 for these secret programs, and they put them in these giant burn pits and burned it all. And black smoke for miles. He got very sick, ended up suing the government. He died recently. Real sad story about the real history of Area 51 and some of the things that they've done out they did out there, just in pursuit of this technology and the pursuit of getting rid of it or trying to cover it up, which backfired on them. We probably wouldn't have heard all about that if it weren't for Fred Dunham. So a lot of people wouldn't have heard of it. Metamaterials, creating the first invisibility cloaks. So they these invisibility cloaks. So this was the first human ever cloaked with an invisibility cloak. This was this first one was made by a guy named Dr. Nathan Cohen, who runs a company called Fractal Antenna Systems, which are super interesting fractal pattern antennas. So he builds these metamaterials out of printed fractal patterns on these objects. If you zoom up close to that, you'll see that it's printed fractals. They cloaked him at microwave, and the way that works is that your signal goes into this material and then goes around it. So very interesting stuff. So crude metamaterials can be built with these types of split ring resonators. There's a number of different types. I think the S rings work the best, apparently, these S ring resonators. There was a study that I saw recently on that paper I read. These acoustic metamaterials can also be built that do the same thing with sound waves that regular metamaterials do with light waves. And there's a whole study that was done into US Navy did on this, into sonar invisibility for submarines. This is real stuff, real cool acoustic metamaterials. This is Echo Noise Control Technologies in Ontario, Canada, the world's quietest room, for ultra sensitive microphones and other, testing of science equipment that requires, zero sound or no noise. can be conducted in that facility if you're looking for something like that. There's also acoustic metamaterials that are chiral metamaterials. So one of them is an example is the cochlea in your inner ear, which is responsible for you being able to hear me right now. It separates all the frequencies and maps them out so that your brain can attenuate the lower frequencies, which get absorbed by the hairs on the inside of this cochlea right at the opening, and that filters out those frequencies as you go further into the seashell. And the higher frequencies are at the inner part of your inner ear. So, and the neurons on all these different hairs go to your brain, and those correspond to all the different frequencies that your brain then breaks down and interprets as the frequencies that you're hearing and the sound that you hear. So chiral metamaterials can also be used to sinusoidally or chirally polarize light. Not sure why you'd want to do that, but there might be a reason or a time where you want to do that and need to know about these things. John Pendry actually was the one to coin the term metamaterials. They were predicted by a guy named Victor Veselago in the 70s, late 70s, but weren't actually created or discovered until around the mid 80s, I believe. The late 80s is when they really started publishing and getting public on them. These C-shaped split ring resonators, and this is the Swiss roll. These the two C-ring resonators with another. These seem to work really good as well. A lot of experimentation we're done with those types of resonator systems, but the fractal antennas seem, I think, are some of the most curious. It's just crazy how that works, just the geometry of it, where you add that fractal pattern to it, and the more iterations that you add, it's orders of magnitude that your fidelity goes up. So it's just really cool stuff when it comes to the geometry of our universe and how nature loves geometry. And geometry can also be used inside of these materials, which are mapping materials. These materials direct the flow of light to change the direction of the flow of light. So they're able to really, all this thing really does is it spreads out in a thin line horizontally all the light that comes from behind it. So it smears it out and just tries to take, so the most amount of light that's coming through will overshadow and blur out the least amount, so right here, there's not enough for his head, and it sort of moves his head over here. You can sort of see his head in the shield on the right-hand side of it, that it's moved it laterally about 12 inches over, just from, and this is all due to the structure of the atoms in this clear translucent material. And if you could do this perfectly with every frequency with no losses, you'd have a Harry Potter invisibility cloak, and not one that you can make with the green screen, but in any case, there's other ways of bending light. You can use this mirage effect that they developed, this mirage effect to hide objects with this series of carbon nanotubes. They run a little bit of voltage through the carbon nanotubes. It reaches thousands of degrees in just a couple nanoseconds right at that surface. And that really high temperature gradient causes a temperature inversion or a mirage effect, which actually causes the wires to disappear from view at this angle. Similar mirage effects, the Flying Dutchman effect, also called Fata Morgana, is a temperature inversion mirage effect where you can bend light just using temperature, cold air on top of hot air, a cold surface on top of a really hot surface. And these can be created and maintained using, topological insulators. So lots more sources here I have on invisibility theory, documenting it, as far as it goes back to everything we can find in the academic literature, a deep overview of sources on invisibility. And if I'm missing any that are earlier than this for the initial development of this, I would like to incorporate those or get more information on those, because I know there are probably a lot of classified stuff that may not have been included on here that may have come out or is still coming out. Recently came out about these BAE has developing this adaptive camouflage protection using these chromatic hexagon shaped cells, which can heat up or cool down. They even have ones that can change color with these hexagons. So the hexagons can change color, and they can also change their thermal imprint. So they can make the thing look like a SUV from far away. This is a thermal infrared thermal imaging camera. All those drones that were finding the tanks in the Ukraine using thermal imaging. Well, the tanks have this technology. You're not able to see them. There's also counter invisibility technology. China's developed a number of quantum radar systems using pairs of entangled photons, and they can detect things with using entanglement, quantum entanglement. So even if you're using a cloaking device or something, you're still breaking quantum entanglement, because even the photons warping around you, it's interacting with the metamaterial in your invisibility cloak. So they can detect you using quantum entanglement. Really interesting. The history of, now we're going to get into propulsion technologies and the history of U.S. Air Force anti-gravity research. Again, thank you all for tuning in. And sorry this is gone. I've already been an hour, right? I'm like halfway through. Oh God, I'm gonna have to try to go a little quicker so Nikola Tesla has a UFO patent from 1928. Not sure anyone's ever built this successfully or that it worked, but there's people working on this stuff at least. Thomas Townsend Brown the same year discovered the Biefeld-Brown effect with a Crookes tube, and had a lot of ideas on using this, and got a lot of funding from a number of different people during the 1950s to build and work and to test this stuff out. The 40s, it was harder for him to do that, but I think after the saucer craze in 47, he was able to get funding and actually get interest in research and development into actual technologies. And that was useful because these things we'll talk about later were actually highly, a lot of good technologies came from that, even though they didn't produce anti-gravity. Lots of useful technologies did come from that. So there was a 1957 quantum gravity meeting in Copenhagen with this was Oscar Klein, not to be confused with Felix Klein of the Klein bottle fame. Charles Meissner was there, discoverer of the Meissner effect, and a number of other scientists, famous scientists of the time. There's a lot of other interesting contributors to the 1950s GR literature. I include in here with some background of it wasn't a very popular subject until it seems like the 1950s or 60s. It took off a little more. But earlier in 1957, before this quantum gravity meeting that they held in Copenhagen, there was a more interesting quantum gravity meeting that was held at the Secret College in University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And this secret gravity conference I learned about from Eric Weinstein, and apparently Mr. Smith was one of the attendees, was actually Richard Feynman of the Manhattan Project, one of the PhD, a Nobel Prize winning physicists, one of the most smartest men who ever lived, and he was there attending this secret gravity conference in 57 under a fake name. Very curious. 1955, we have the Bonson Company and a letter from Andrew Bonson to Bryce and Cecil Dewitt, thanking them for their contribution and also helping and coming by the lab, and that the Air Force has now shown some interest in our work, thanks to some of his comments and stuff. So the Air Force 1955, getting interested in the Bonson Company. The Air Force also working with Bryce and Cecil DeWitt as their head physicist for this secret college to sort of investigate these things for them as a cutout or what have you. So they're not, interesting. This gravity conference is a lot of interesting stuff in those papers from the gravity conference, including discussions of wormholes and torsion physics, lots of different ideas for a role of gravitation. Lewis Witten was also part of this, and it's curious whether there's an argument that Eric Weinstein had, I think, with Brian Greene, which was great, where they argued back and forth on whether Witten sent modern physics on a wild goose chase with the whole string theory, and that string theory was just invented to disrupt and throw people off of all this better physics that was being developed with this at the time. I don't know. It's certainly curious, but Richard Feynman, he goes to the secret gravity conference and tells this argument to Herman Bondi, and Herman Bondi writes down this sticky bead argument. I thought was super interesting. The sticky bead argument was the basis behind Weber bars, these early gravitational wave detectors, because Feynman's gravitational wave detector, he said it's simply two beads sliding freely, but with a small amount of friction on a rigid rod. As the wave passes over the rod, atomic forces hold the length of the rod fixed, but the proper distance between the two beads oscillates. Thus, the beads rub up against the rod, dissipating heat. And apparently, he never published or talked about this until this secret gravity conference. And then Herman Bondi took the idea and published on it. And then, we have Joseph Weber. He was a U.S. Naval Academy gravitational physicist who built the first Weber bars, the first gravitational wave detectors, and a lot of the LIGO interferometer stuff is based on research that Joseph Weber pioneered. And Weber also worked on U.S. Navy laser technology. So in addition to that, he spent a lot of decades during the 1960s helping to develop lasers and laser technology. The history of laser technology from when they built the first working laser in 1960 up until some of the more advanced lasers. Laser physics, I'm not going to get into all of it. It's not, we don't have enough time to get into it. This is just the real core stuff that's focused on anything related to the U.S. Air Force or government interest in UFOs. So here we have propulsion concepts of advanced propulsion concepts, project outgrowth of U.S. Air Force Rocket Propulsion Laboratory at Edwards Air Force Base, published in June 1972. And this is when they were starting a lot of laser research and laser physics research, as well as, unmanned aerial vehicles, and that kind of stuff. But they realized in this report, and you can see something happened in the late 1960s at the close of, 1968, they closed Project Blue Book, of course. And the Air Force then goes and publishes this 4 years later, saying that, this project outgrowth, saying that, we really need to outgrow our old ways and our old technology and find out how we can grow into the new ways and develop the new material science and some of the other things that we need. So I think at that point, they might have looked at some of all the nanotechnology and all the advanced physics and really thought it was beyond them to really get a hold of that and understand that stuff. And that's apparent when you read this report and look into it. There was, of course, back to the lasers, the slide's out of order. Q division still classified the powerful lasers that they were doing out there. I'd really like to see an experiment done with a really powerful laser using it with the Cavendish experiment to see if we can alter gravity using really high energy light. And we'll get more into that later. Nonlinear optics, interesting branch that gets in, when you start pumping these lasers to these really high energies, the electric field, the polarization of the vacuum, like can't handle all that energy going through it. So you actually have nonlinear effects that pop up in optics when you get up past that Schwinger limit. The vacuum itself becomes nonlinear, and the superposition principle no longer holds. A lot of UFO reports, there's the classic sound that a UFO makes. Everyone knows, what does a UFO sound like? That pulsating. Well, that's caused by a beat frequency in physics. So when you have two frequencies that are going over one another, two or more, you get more than that, you get this four-wave mixing effect, and you can get some interesting nonlinear optics and intermodulation phenomenon. It's also allegedly you can use this for pumping states of atoms and pumping materials, because the four waves of this leftover energy. But there could be mixing of waves in this, and that's why it's important to look into the physics of this kinds of stuff. Of course, the four-wave mixing that I got from Paul Laviolette, who is sad. I'm saddened to say Paul Laviolette recently passed away. He was on, you can go look up he was also on a guest here before in the past on the conference, but his book talked about this. One of the first to really talk about this and reveal this microwave phase conjugation and these phase conjugate mirrors, which are, really interesting mirrors that reflect and the incident angle. It doesn't reflect off it at the same angle, it reflects back no matter what angle you shine at it. And there's weird effects and weird things that you can get from these phase conjugate mirrors. And I encourage people to go look into those materials a little more, because apparently you can use these phase conjugate mirrors and this microwave phase conjugation with this four-wave mixing to pump these materials and actually get propulsion and lift out of it. And it may have been developed off of this, but this technology really goes back to Lake Marabou and Project Skyvault and the Lightcraft whole stuff, which started with John Lewis and Mirabeau at Rensselaer Polytech in the 1980s, and went on, was talked about briefly in a couple, Future Fantastic was a mainstream thing that talked about these laser light craft of the future and how everything was going to be these light propelled spacecraft, and that disappeared, and a lot of this stuff went classified, and a lot of this research continued, but just under deep secrecy. So it just wasn't allowed to really get out, and was being used for a lot of other stuff. NASA technical papers, 1986, laser powered magnetohydrodynamic generators and stuff. There's patents on all this stuff going back. This whole thing with the Kantrowitz limit, yeah, they threw out the idea of ramjet engines. They realized that you can't get this supersonic critical flow through these engines the right way. I mean, you're only going to reach this limit, and that if we want to pass that limit with our aircraft, then we need to warp the air around the craft instead of trying to send it through turbines and jet propel it out the other end. And so this is a patent by Kevin Kremeyer, I think is the name, and it blasts a laser induced air ignition. So they blast a laser a distance L out in front of the nose cone of the vehicle. And actually interesting that NACA did this in 1947 with a nose cone. So they had this nose cone, this airspeed head, right? It said it was an airspeed head for pilot instruments, right? That's what it says in the inside Chuck Yeager's XS #1. Well, that's the public version that they give you. All right. The classified version, which they don't tell you, is that this nose cone was electrostatically charged to a very high voltage, and that voltage created an air spike that would basically reduce the bow shock in front of the craft. This X1 would never have been able to break the sound barrier if it didn't have that electrified nose cone, which is a classified component of the technology. And this, of course, they got rid of the nose cone, and now they use this laser where they can blast the air, and it's much more powerful. They literally heat it, they super cavitate the air out in front of the craft so that they can remove all the air resistance. And apparently it works in water as well for these hypersonic supercavitating torpedoes. Also found this other interesting patent on laser-based flow modification to control vehicle flight paths by the same inventor, that they can shine lasers on the wing of an aircraft and create these same effects to create flow modifications, so they could turn your plane or control your plane or make your plane crash using these lasers, which would leave no physical trace of, on the aircraft itself. It would only warp the air that's going around the craft and cause the plane to malfunction. Curious. 1958, 1960 Bonson Labs experiments by Thomas Townsend Brown in North Carolina. I talked about this before. I talked about the barium titanate, how you can see it up on the board and one of the on the blackboard in the background of one of the film that you can get thanks to Stan Dio having posted the whole thing. The Bonson Labs were an air conditioning manufacturer who had a bunch of money because air conditioning was big, and they were one of the few companies back in the 50s that did it. And so they made a lot of money with air conditioning. And, like a good CAO and businessman who has lots of money, they tried to give back and actually do something useful for the science and humanity with that money. And they chose to fund anti-gravity research. So good on them, because this wouldn't have taken place and we wouldn't have this awesome historical archive of knowing all this. And it brought a number of scientists together too. Bryce and Cecil Dewitt visited the lab. You can see John Lear's father invented the Learjet, go to the lab at one point. There's a number of interesting personnel and scientists who show up to the lab and go check it out. And some of these really interesting ideas that came out of these, experiments and these ideas, the plasma vortexes, that magnetohydrodynamics, that they could charge the air and then, move the air around, and lots of stuff was thought up and experimented with at Bonson Labs from 56 to 59. Really cool stuff. Again, I don't know all these people here, but I'm sure I can go through and figure out who they are. We did a lot of it. Mark in particular has done a number of replications and experiments into this, and I know that Tim's built a number of these tons of these lifters. I mean, this is how I got into this 20 years ago with American Anti-Gravity, and I know MIT built an electric plane that runs on Biefeld-Brown effect, and it's pretty cool and efficient and good. But again, is it anti-gravity? There's a whole debate over this, and the ESA Martin Tajmir, it says no, it's the ion wind. And, there's a debate going back and forth on it. But one thing is for sure, that these materials have some unique properties based on these hysteresis curves. And there's classes of materials you get shown in this chart here: piezoelectric materials, pyroelectric materials, and ferroelectric materials. And here's their electromagnetic response charts. And this curve is called the hysteresis curve. And this is important for charging and discharging dielectrics, which comes up later in some of this research. So 1950s, there was a lot of interest in gravity research. You had techno scammers like Otis Carr build this UFO flying saucer and take people's money to invest in his company to develop anti-gravity. And, brought this whole idea forth of this gyroscopic propulsion, which was later revived by Eric Laithwaite in the 1980s, and a number of popularized by the Sandy Kidd invention, the Sandy Kidd, invention, which it's just climbing a central pole. It's literally, there's a central pole in the middle, and it's using that as support and climbing up it. It's not a real anti-gravity device, and I challenge anyone out there to use gyroscopes to make gravity. We did see some interesting anomalies in some of these machines that we built, though, and this really, the research and the expert on this is Mike Gamble, and Mike Gamble is he's on APEC of February 13th, 2021. Was a good one to go back and look up, and he built these huge gyroscopes for Boeing research, and did a ton of research on gyroscopic propulsion and stuff for Boeing. So really the expert to go to on that whole thing. There's this whole idea that, gravity might work the same as electromagnetism, that there might be a gravitomagnetic analog of gravity. This is called gem theory. Gem theory was tested with NASA's Gravity Probe B, and they found that, yes, there is a frame dragging effect around the Earth. And there is something to be said about gem theory, though, that there's some problems in the math when you really get into the specifics of it. And for that, I would go to Nathan Innan's presentation for SSI APW 2020 and check out what Nathan Innan laid out in about gem theory in his presentation, because he really does a phenomenal job of just destroying it and showing how it might some other approaches that would work a little bit better to this. So these are things that have been tried in the past, and there was funding that went into these. And in 1959, you had Frederick Alzaphan, publish his first paper in Advances in Astronomical Sciences. These are all ideas that have been thought up and tried before. And so Alzaphan thought up this idea that, hey, you get these nuclear magnetic spin resonances. What happens if you get them all aligned? It could maybe gravity be like a random or a stochastic effect that's affecting all these molecules because of their random interaction, and that if you line them all up, that you could get gravity to shut off. And so this was early on, and again, 1940s is when this was discovered. 1950s is when it was really being developed, and 1960s is maybe it's still being developed today with spintronics technology, topological insulators, spin transistors, spin orbit torque, chiral magnetics, a number of newer technologies, but it's all based on these spin magnetic resonances of atoms and stuff. And lots of experiments were done trying to negate gravity, but we discovered a lot of other cool stuff in the process. Didn't discover anti-gravity through aligning these spins and stuff, but we discovered how superfluidity works. Superfluidity was first discovered in 1937 by Allen and Meissner, and kind of have a better understanding of how it works now, thanks to these spin alignments and these vortices that form to produce really interesting quantum liquids. Now, a lot of spin gravity stuff has been tried. I mentioned this, Nazi Bell experiment and how similar that was to this Kecksburg acorn that crashed in 1965 out in Kecksburg, PA, UFO crash. Rumors that it's using rotating liquid mercury. Of course, mercury becomes a superconductor at really cold temperatures. No one really knows why. And also it's magnetic and will spin around if you apply magnetic fields to it and stuff. So apparently General Electric did a lot of research into this in the 70s with a guy named Henry William Wallace in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. You can go and look up and find some interesting history and stuff on that. But a lot of it's either classified or just lost to the history. We do find some in the academic literature as well. In 1966, DeWitt published Superconductors and Gravitational Drag. You can look this paper up in Physics Review Letters. And really interesting that, he was predicting that spinning superconductors could produce this gravitational drag. And it seems to be related. of course, we all know about Project Grasp and Boeing and Podkletnov, Ning Lee, and NASA on their research with spinning superconductors and how that might produce gravitational effects or anomalies. Now, why might that be? And in some of the deeper physics, you get into this whole idea that everything's waves. It's all spatial geometries and wavelengths. It's the fields that create the matter, and then the matter that creates the fields in this sort of background feed loop cycle that kind of produces everything in our universe. And these interpretations of physics, I think that the pilot wave theory or Bohmian mechanics is the proper approach. I don't believe in determinism and the Copenhagen interpretation and some of these other ideas. I think that a lot of it lies in just the connections of space time. Maybe it's all space and time. It's just the way that it's connected. And the other theory is that space and time might just be emergent of quantum entanglement and something else that's going on the smaller level. Certainly interesting that the universe seems, well, first off, there's quantum spins and some of that other stuff can be resolved through geometry and really the math that you have to dive into to really get a grip on that. The UFO materials, I'm back to this now. Apparently, I didn't move that around in this. It's a big presentation, but these things might be supercavitations, might be, terahertz waveguides or waveguides that are used to pump a light into. Jack Valet used Dr. Gary Nolan's lab, and I think there's 2 R's in Gary Nolan right here, to analyze some of these UFO samples that he had. He goes to crash sites and documents all these. He's been doing it since the 70s. He's got all these pieces of metal, and they analyzed them and found all these, strange isotope ratios and stuff and the building blocks of what they're working with. A lot of those ingots that get dropped out of UFOs look like they have supercavitation done to the surface, and they could be fusion fuel. There's a theory that they're, cold fusion or some type of supercavitation fusion fuel that's being used to power the craft. I did a whole coverage of a series of lectures and also colloquium presentations of all these top scientists at cold fusion. This was in 2014, which is almost 10 years ago now. So, and half the guys in this room are dead now. And I got all that on film and recorded it from back in 2014 and preserved that for future generations. This is like tons of cold fusion research that's blacklisted by the mainstream, being conducted by very intelligent, very serious, very real scientists. And I encourage anyone who's interested in learning more to go check that out from back in 2014 when I covered that at MIT. Lots of stuff on these models and how cold fusion might work. There's also mechanical metamaterials and these ideas that parts of these ships or alien ships might be engineered or designed using mechanical metamaterials. As well as photonic and other types of metamaterials. There's this whole talk about the terahertz gap as this gap in the electromagnetic spectrum where stuff doesn't really work or doesn't break down, and it's associated with the 0 point energy of the atom itself. That gap in the spectrum, apparently, it's related to the fields that produce matter, mass, and it's right smack in the middle of the spectrum. So you have everything that's on this side and then everything on that side, and this is right smack in the middle. And apparently it's this where the 0 point field coincides with the structure of the atom, which gives rise to the Higgs field. And there may be something to that where you can warp gravity using strong enough terahertz waves. Of course, you get down to this, this is imaging and tweezing, so you have to correspond your wavelengths to the size of whatever you want to interact with. And this is like scanning electron microscopes, tomography, deeper, and then X-ray diffraction, NMR. Again, these materials, why are they layered? What could possibly be going on here? Well, this kind of look like Bragg mirrors or dielectric mirrors. They could be creating the acoustic pyramid, or the pyramid of Chichen Itza. It was proven in a paper here by Nico F. Deklerek and Joris Degriek that it's a real world example of an acoustic Bragg reflector, where it takes an incoming clap or single pulse and returns a series of sharpened, very rapid return pulses, which actually they clap and it sounds like a bird when it reflects off the pyramid. They say, oh, it's a Quetzalcoatl, and I don't know how it does that. Well, it does it because of Bragg reflection. Could have something to do with these photonic crystals in the structure of these surfaces, where you're pumping, pulses into this of light into this, and it's breaking it down or reflecting it in localized coherent structures, which that coherence is maybe important for producing and setting up entanglement and coherence. And of course, terahertz comes up in Isaac Kemp's PhD. I was searching for top secret, research at Wright Patterson. Came up. I found this university student who was working for the ultrafast photonics lab at Wright State, who had been arrested for bringing documents home from his work at Wright State University. Apparently, Wright State's ultrafast photonics lab is involved in some classified research for the United States Air Force, which is right nearby, coincidentally. Isaac Kemp wrote his PhD thesis on terahertz imaging for aerospace applications and a number of terahertz technologies. So gives us some insights into, real government research into terahertz and, some of the applications, at least. I wonder what he would think of this whole idea of this Hal Puthoff's and this metamaterial that we blast terahertz at it and it can float. I'd really be curious to see what he thinks of that kind of stuff. And if it, this is the public stuff that he's publishing on, and it's, ways to look at old aircraft's hulls through the paint and determine if there's damage. That can't be all that they're doing with this. It can't be that serious. If there's got to be more to it. Anyways, there is more to it. We know that these security applications use these millimeter waves at the airport to scan, when you go through security checkpoints at the airport. But these terahertz waves would be able to see through buildings and walls in a manner similar to like that movie Eraser, where they had those guns that could see through the walls and stuff. So it's like the millimeter waves that they use at the airport, but like way another level. Anyways, it's based on this antenna theory, and this is important for understanding the effects of how UFOs work, because there's near field and far field. There's this radiative and non-radiative, non-radiative and then radiative. So stuff you can check electronics, and they have to, they have FCC compliance testing to make sure that like your electronics aren't radiating any electromagnetic radiation that's unwanted or could cause interference and stuff. And Fresnel zones are interesting because they occur inside the range of between buildings and stuff. This is why walkie-talkies won't work outside of the certain ranges, because they operate within that Fresnel zone. And if you step outside of that, it doesn't work inside that range envelope. So yeah, you can take the Helmholtz equation and apply it to anything, including your apartment, and figure out where's the best place to put your Wi-Fi router to get the best signal everywhere in your apartment, just by solving for the Helmholtz equation for the geometry of your building. And that was done by a PhD student named Jason Cole. It's a really cool thing that he did figure out where to put his Wi-Fi router. Yeah, so resonators and trapping things inside of, Helmholtz bottles, for example, or a Helmholtz resonator cavity. This has been known about for over 100 years. And I think could provide some futuristic solutions to some of the problems that we're currently facing in modern quantum computer engineering with regards to the photonics and how to build better photonics and systems. We also have waveguides and mirrors, and with some of these advanced materials that we can build photonic circuits, which use spintronics and photonics instead of electronics. So you're not pushing electrons around, you're actually just pushing light or energy around in a much more energy efficient, and also the size of these things compared to, the limit of what you can build with conventional electronics is off the charts of what we're going to be able to do in the future with photonics. So I think that if we were looking at alien technology back in the 40s or 50s, and it was something like this, we would have obviously felt pretty overwhelmed, even in the late 60s, 70s, kind of see where they were going with Project Outgrowth and some of the conclusions there after they closed Blue Book officially. 5D data storage. Again, you can store data in these 5D crystals. They're called the Superman memory crystal. This is real technology. It's a nanostructured glass for permanent recording digital data. It said it can store 360 terabytes of data for billions of years. It's super stable. It's first demonstrated in 2013. So 10 years ago. This is 10-year-old technology. And Hitachi and Microsoft have been working on developing this ever since. There's also spin glasses, like you can imprint, so similar to how you imprint these things on these memory crystals, you can imprint magnetic fields on these spin glasses, either for memory or for other purposes. If you wanted to create a type of spin, one where the spins would go a certain way. So paramagnets, for example, they show what happens in paramagnetism versus ferromagnetism or diamagnetism, and how these spin glasses can lock in or trap these spins. And some of the interesting things that you get with this. So this is condensed matter physics of these spin glasses, and when you get coherent states as well, you get strange metals and also and then Fermi liquids when there's complete decoherence. So there's a whole new class of materials in here with some really interesting properties and applications that could be useful for engineering, quantum systems like quantum computers or UFOs. And again, the classical critical ordered, and you get this ordered state in the spin glass where everything's ordered and stuck in those aligned spin states. And then you get this quantum critical state where you get strange metals, and then a disordered state where you just get this Fermi liquid. Now, strange metals, as Leonard Susskind pointed out in his his presentation, I think this was, I have a link to it in the description of the notes of the slide presentation. But strange metals are topologically equivalent to extremal black holes. So you want to create a black hole for that half of your wormhole. These strange metals might be a way to do it. And the behavior of these systems, these charge carriers are bosons, which has never been seen before. It's really weird physics that we're tapping into, and we're able to build these materials now that exploit quantum physics for different uses. And I think that if UFOs are beating gravity, then they're exploiting these innate understandings of quantum physics for sure. So does gravity come from that random 0 point friction or 0 point frequencies in those green arrows. So basically you have this many particle system of this quantum liquid and all these interactions that are random interactions that add up. And this is a theory called stochastic quantum gravity. But it basically it says that if you can order all those interactions and figure out those interactions and figure out what's going on to and at the quantum physics of mass and those interactions that produce mass, then you might be able to warp the fabric of space-time. Well, how can we do that? And is anyone working on this? Well, Lockheed Martin hired a physicist named Bernard Hayes, and he wrote a number of papers on this idea of generating inertial reaction forces through the vacuum and gravity and the quantum vacuum hypothesis. Very interesting stuff. Skunk Works advisor, from 1996 to 2000, who knows? Hal Puthoff wrote some papers with him, and the interesting approach to general relativity using polarizable vacuum, where you can locally alter your permittivity and permeability of free space, thereby, changing the way that gravitons or that speed of gravitational interaction with the craft. Very interesting stuff, but how do you actually produce it and create it? Well, that gets into a number of things. We already talked about Sal Pays and his U.S. Navy patents, and some of those ideas he's had with the Schwinger limit and the superforce unification, polarizing the vacuum that, you pump enough energy and you can create these positive and negative energy states. There's an idea that, muons might produce anti-gravity, but they, there's an idea that antimatter might produce anti-gravity, but that was disproven recently. So we're back to square one with this idea of this dynamic Casimir effect or moving mirrors. This was mentioned in DoD, the DR Defense Intelligence Reference documents by Eric Davis. And this optical cavities where you can pump one side of the optical cavity, thereby producing these interesting effects. So this ties into some of the stuff I'm going to get into in a second. But again, quantized inertia, DARPA has contracts with this guy, Mike McCulloch, on this maritime Casimir effect, and they're working on developing this quantized inertia similar to the M drive almost. And people are like, well, how can you kick off nothing? How can you push off of nothing? Well, you're not pushing off of nothing. You're pushing off of Rindler horizons or information horizons. And in Rindler space-time and your local light cone, there's basically this wall that if you break the speed, if you push something faster than the speed of light, you can't reach what's beyond it because the information horizon. And so you basically have found a quantum kickboard. A quantum kickboard where you can push off literally nothing, the fabric of the Rindler horizon in space-time. And the way you do this is with incredibly high rise times. And this was discovered in, Biefeld-Brown's work in the 50s, and others have pointed out these, you need these sharp sawtooth waveforms with this, and it's all about the rise time and getting that punch for the rise time. We would do this through spark gaps and a number of other methods that our engineers have used to do this in the lab as well. So there's a good example right here of a spark gap. Roger Scheuer has also presented on here about his M drive, and it's the same kind of idea. You have this cavity with microwaves being pumped in, and you're pushing off of this quantum kickboard, creating a larger force out one side. And this is based on battle-tested physics. You have this Heisenberg uncertainty relationship. So as you have that really short time, the energy goes, if you make that time go to zero in the time version of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, your energy will go really high, astronomically high, and could go nonlinear So that's how you could break that sort of Schwinger limit for a split second using this Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And the other idea is by using, squeezed light or squeezed coherent states, that you're squeezing that X factor of the position, so your momentum can go to infinity, or go incredibly, not infinity, but your momentum can go can jump. So you can create momentum potentially by using Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Again, this might be better if you use polariton lasers and these other types of systems. We'll get into that a little more. There's this idea by Nick Vamivakis on generating negative energy using cavity exciton polaritons. This is also talked about in some of the DoD Defense Intelligence reference documents by Eric Davis, where he talks about methods of generating negative energies. He mentions squeeze states, and I believe he mentions polaritons, exciton polaritons. So these are quasi particles. Yeah, they looked into antimatter, anti-gravity, and found out it didn't work. So that's been debunked. They have the same gravity. Protons and antiprotons fall the same. But these surface plasma and polariton condensates, and what we can do with squeezed vacuum state and these states, there might be some interesting physics going on here. Also called liquid light, room temperature superfluidity was observed in a polariton condensate. So you get these polariton condensates inside of these liquid light, trapped in slowed liquid light. You can get room temperature superfluidity and superconductivity, which is amazing. This is just mind-blowing. This has been battle tested by a number of different labs. So this is 100% real. Len Howe won the Nobel Prize, I believe, for they slowed, stopped, and restarted light using these the photonic crystals in these materials in their lab. Really impressive stuff. But we're unlocking a lot about how light and the electromagnetic forces hold the universe together, communicate all the information with the world to itself, and understanding how it does this with different materials inside of different materials with near and far field effects. Spintronics, a whole nother. It was mentioned in one of the 38 study areas under OSAP course. Big stuff going into this as far as the future of electronics, and also quantum physics, photonic circuits, photonic information systems, quantum information systems. And this is all predicted by Richard Feynman in his 1959 lecture. There's plenty of room at the bottom. Again, get into the Hal Puthoff stuff with the dielectric filling between two metal mirrors, and this wave propagation, and this in these what could be the physics behind these bismuth magnesium samples, the bismuth magnesium samples that he alleges were part of the Roswell wreckage or Roswell craft. And we'll talk about this whole idea a little bit. I have some new ideas on this that I want to get out, and it's the last slide. Metamaterials, of course, yeah, you can pump metamaterials, and the energies are high enough, then nothing will get in, because your energy of this will be higher than whatever it is. You could block, so yeah, you could create some pretty crazy force fields and shields, even using these types of technologies in the future, potentially. Jack Sarfati and his low power warp drive theory on how the tic tac works, the stress energy tensor and how we manipulate that. It's good theoretical physics, but I'm trying to focus on the experimental side of this and how we can actually, just break it down for the engineers to actually try to build this stuff in the future, and what physics need to be looked into for that. I think that these so this diagram here shows the phase state, displaced vacuum coherent state, squeezed coherent state, squeezed vacuum state, and just regular vacuum state, and what that means in terms of the Q quadrature and P quadrature. And these Glauber states are interesting, along with this Frank Condon principle. This comes up in some of Wheeler's later work in the 1980s. Well, they were, which I thought was super interesting. There's this whole idea of vibronic coupling that happens inside of atoms too. So, and molecules rather, not just atoms. So they have to be atoms that are stuck in a molecule can have these 6 different modes of vibronic coupling that can occur in types of materials. So these are other vibrational interactions that can influence materials and how they interact. Again, these first 8 bound eigenstates in the wavelengths of a particle in a well, potential well. Spatiotemporal optical vortices are super interesting that came up. And basically, you can create pulses which could potentially transfer information, accelerate particles, or perform spectroscopy by using these metamaterials in the circular concentric rings and pulsing them. This was theorized in, I think, 2016. I think just last year, 2021 maybe, they did it. They actually pulled this off in the laboratory, but you can create basically donut pulses or toroidally polarized light. And this might be what UFOs are creating around their craft to fly or accelerate, particles, for example. There's this mass energy equivalence, which very simply stated by Einstein, E equals mc squared. But if you solve for mass, it just says that mass is energy divided by the square of the speed of light. So therefore, we should be able to create mass if we have enough energy in the right form. It has to be traveling in a circle, though, because the c squared is the speed of light squared. And that means it's looping around it on itself. So you have to have energy that's trapped or spinning in a circle. And this came up recently. This phonon-naraton. This came up actually this morning. I was researching stuff. If you combine a photon, a phonon, and an exciton, you get this other crazy particle, quasi-particles that they're inventing and now creating, and created colorful names for these. But I had this idea that if you took trapped light in a structure similar to a symbol and then vibrated it with the symbol's frequency, that you could create a phononoton, because it's elusive. It's theorized, but no one's ever actually created one of these phonoritons. And I thought that this might be a way you could actually do it. And it'd be interesting to test the gravitational properties of this. And also test the gravitational properties of what happens if we trap light in a circle and get tons of it spinning, and what effect that will have on gravity. Mark and me are going to work on setting up a very hypersensitive balance so that we can do Cavendish experiment. And then once we get Cavendish experiment working, we're going to start, experimenting with, high powered light and see if that has any effect on gravity itself. And that's where I'm currently at with how I think we should go with how UFOs fly and how they actually work. I think that, space-time is emergent and it's woven through the fabric of quantum entanglement. And that, all the laws of relativity are emergent from this deeper physics of quantum entanglement, that everything's really connected everywhere all at once in this weird way. And that if you can create enough light, this ER equals EPR thing might be able to pump enough light into another part of the universe, or somehow get these two states to be entangled. Therefore, you could create a wormhole between them. That you basically create enough light, a light channel that's strong enough between these 2 points in space, then you've essentially created a wormhole. And this was in 1935. Albert Einstein and Nathan Rosen published this paper, which demonstrated the principle of this, that the the region containing the curvature singularity. And again, it's like as David mentioned in the last podcast, it's all about the geometry of that opening, that throat. It's all about the geometry of the throat. It doesn't matter what's on the mouth or the other end. It just matters how do you produce that throat and create that wormhole throat. And could it be that if you put enough coherent light between, you know, objects, that you can create a wormhole using this the structure of light itself, or quantum entangled light. You have to trap light, vibrate it, and squeeze it. And if you can do that with the squeezing and the states, you might be able to get some interesting physics out of it. Of course, it's beyond me, and I think I've exhausted everything I can on. You know, maybe in another 10 years, but this is where I'm at with how I think they work. And what I want to try for the future is experiments that involve, you know, setting up these super sensitive balances that can measure gravity very minutely, or these maybe some of these. I'd like to set the thing that the DoD had in that, with that hypersensitive needle that they were using to detect gravity in that recent. I forget where that was. That was a really cool thing. But yeah, experiment like that where we could produce stuff and then test its effect on gravity. I think that if you get enough of these quantum entangled particles and that you can squeeze their locality, you can get them to maybe tunnel through space-time in a wormhole, or maybe create just a brief wormhole around the craft that you could like Alcubierre drive. And this can be done through light pumped metamaterials. Or I don't know. That's the conclusion end of my presentation of a lot of the technologies that I've studied and where I'm at right now. And I'm happy to take questions and talk to people, because I'm kind of over the monologue at this point.
Well, Jeremy, you're all set. Look at that. So many slides, man. So many slides. Let me do this. I want to put this thing on. Oh, you know what, Jeremy? Let me stop your screen share, sir. Okay. Oops. Sorry about that. Sorry. Let me put this thing on gallery view. Everyone, please give an enormous applause to Mr. Jeremy Reese. Jeremy, that is a wonderful, incredibly in-depth analysis. I mean, I'm sure everyone here knows Jeremy. This is why he's famous. This analysis and synthesis, being able to go deep and go through a ton of different concepts. And Jeremy, this is just par excellence, sir. So thank you. Thank you so much.
I wish I had a little more time, because some of the slides were out of order, and then some of the stuff I could have put it together a little better at the end there. I was really crunching to get this all together and try and put that whole thing in. Again, I posted the link to the PowerPoint presentation in the chat, so everyone can go and check out the links, and if they want to look up sources for anything, if I've forgotten anything, they can let me know.
Now, I'm not sure if we're going to have time to do questions, because we've only got about 4 minutes until Mark Sokol is ready to come on. So that I'm not sure about. I did want to mention something. Again, today is our last conference. This is something that we may revisit in the future, right? We just want to we want to give this a rest, I guess. You know, again, this has been the Woodstock of anti-gravity. All of us together have accomplished some really, really amazing things over the last 2 years. It's been a breakthrough. You know, I mean, if I could ramble for just a moment, the thing that when Mark came to me, the thing that kind of caught me about it was this idea of it was during the pandemic, right? And we were all just getting used to using Zoom. And it was like, well, wait a minute, all of these people have Zoom. And so for the first time, we could get everyone together, right? And, you know, it took a while, you know, but I mean, it's for this community, for the alt propulsion community, this is a giant, tremendous first. And it's something a physical conference could have never done. And it's not the achievement of any one person. It's the achievement of all of us working together, right? I mean, we've had, you know, well over 100 presenters and hundreds, if not thousands, of people speaking. You know, we have 75 participants on the call today. I mean, it's been a community effort and a community victory. So, and the reason I led with that was, before we go to Mark Sokol, I did want to mention a couple of things. Dr. Paul LaViolette, who presented here, passed away, I believe, last week. And so I just wanted to mention that, and maybe we could just take a moment to kind of reflect on his contributions. He wrote a number of books, a number of papers. I read those when I was a kid. I'm sure you guys all have as well. He was incredibly well known, and he spoke, he spoke in the media many times. He published a lot. He spoke at lots of different conferences. As well, a few of the other folks that we've lost. Mark McCandlish, as you may recall, I believe we lost him in 2021 in the spring, if I remember correctly. Amy Eskridge, who never presented here at the conference, but Amy was close to a lot of the people here. She unfortunately passed earlier in the year. And Paul Murad, who was a dear friend and a mentor of mine, as well as many of the other people in this conference, he passed as well. So, so again, if we could just take a moment to kind of reflect on some of the folks that we've lost. It's unfortunate, but again, this community has been in existence for 70 years, and it has people of all different age groups in it. And so that's an unfortunate reality, and I guess all we can do is kind of remember them, remember what they contributed, and try and keep their dream alive and help educate others about what they learned. So